Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and rideshare drivers in general are just not being paid what they used to. And there's five big issues or five big reasons that are heavily affecting how much money drivers make. And I want to say in this video, first off, that the biggest reason why drivers don't make that much money right now and it's not as good as it used to be is because Uber and Lyft is one, paying drivers less, which is very unfortunate, and two, they're taking a bigger cut out of their earnings. In case you didn't know, if someone goes out and drives and they make $100, Uber and Lyft will take a percentage of that. And as you can imagine, like I said, not only are they making less money, but Uber and Lyft are taking more money out of drivers' pockets. However, that is not the full story. There's five other reasons that are heavily affecting how much money Uber and Lyft drivers are making. Number one, renting. Now, in case you didn't know, you can rent a car to drive for Uber and Lyft. And as you can imagine, probably not surprising, if you don't have your own car, or let's say you have one but doesn't qualify, or if you just don't want to put the depreciation on that car, you can rent one and it does cost money. Now, back in the day, when I first started driving, I believe this was in 2015 when Lyft rolled this out, maybe 2015/2016, Lyft had something called Express Drive, where what you could do is you could rent a car through Lyft, and if you did, I believe, over 63 rides in a week, that car was free, which was pretty awesome. All Lyft said was, hey, you do over 63 rides in a week, you get to use that car completely for free. All those earnings are yours. And in case you're curious, I'd say the average driver does about 2 rides an hour. So in my mind, when I hear 63 rides, you're looking at about 30-ish hours, 31 hours to do that. Then over time, Lyft kind of got rid of that, being like, you know what, we're actually probably losing money. We're not going to do that anymore. And then it got even worse where they said, okay, you know what, we're going to start charging for renting like maybe $50 a week. Then that turned to $100 a week. Now, on average, at least at the exact time of this video, for the Uber driver and Lyft driver, you're looking at about spending $200 to $300 a week every week to rent a car. Now, of course, there are a lot of drivers who use your own car. That is a different story. But as you can imagine, if you're, let's say, really tight on money, you're like, look, I'm going to rent a car. Let's say your credit isn't that good. Let's say just in your given area, the deals aren't that good. Your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. So if you think about it, if let's say it's a really kind of tricky situation you're in when it comes to renting, and you're like, oh shoot, I'm gonna have to spend $300 a week. I mean, if you think about it, if let's say you have to drive and I'm making this up, $20 an hour, well, that means you're gonna have to drive 15 hours just to break even. And for a lot of drivers out there's a lot of drivers right now that are getting into Uber and Lyft. You know, I just did a video how a lot of people now are starting to drive because of the economy. They're looking for a secondary job, et cetera, et cetera. It's a tricky thing now when it comes to renting that you're just starting already in the hole, even if you want to drive, let's say, part-time. And for most people, part-time, let's say 20-ish hours, 15 of those hours are just for you breaking even on that car. The other 5 is then profit, not the best ROI. And of course, if you think about it, if let's say there's a week where you just can't drive or stuff, you know, life happens, stuff comes up, you're going to actually be losing money or spending money on that rental. Number 2, legal issues. So for the beginning of this video, I want to talk about the things that most people don't think about, right? Renting a car is one of them. This is another big one. And what I'm talking about is, statistically speaking, the more that you're on the road, the bigger the chances of you getting into an accident, right? Kind of stinks to say, but that's the reality of the situation. And this is why it's super unfortunate for a lot of drivers. There are a couple pieces of advice I have, but I think a lot of people forget that if you're just driving a ton, you get into an accident. There are so many situations. I get comments all the time of drivers saying, hey, you know, I was in an accident. It wasn't my fault, but it got switched around, and now they're saying it's my fault, and Uber and Lyft won't cover me, even though they said that they would, blah, blah. It is a super unfortunate situation a lot of drivers can find themselves in. So one, this channel just got sponsored by the Law Office of Asher Hoffman. I'm so happy that this sponsorship took place because they actually, one of their expertise is ride sharing. So if you call them, I have the number listed below in the description, you say Mark Vachero sent you, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And like I said, ride sharing and accidents is one of their many specialties they do focus on. Another big pro tip I'm gonna say for the drivers out there, just get a dash cam. I've said this before in so many videos. Get a 2A one as well that records the outside of your vehicle, right, in case something happens when it comes to an accident, but also the inside. We've probably seen these viral videos and stuff like that of, let's say, people attacking drivers, safety being a huge issue. I mean, it's a very tricky thing for a lot of rideshare drivers. And as you can imagine, all these incidents that happen and take place, that can heavily affect your income and your wallet, especially, let's say, if you just get, for lack of a better phrase, screwed over by Uber and Lyft not covering you. Another thing I say to a lot of drivers, get rideshare insurance, because if you call your insurance, you get to an accident, even if it's not your fault, and you tell them you're driving for Uber and Lyft, they might be like, wait, you didn't tell us you were driving for Uber and Lyft. You never said this. We're now not going to cover you. And insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not cover you. All these little things are kind of like falling into place when it comes to a lot of rideshare drivers, when it comes to the legal issues. And it's just super, super annoying because I see these stories all the time of, let's say, a driver who's making, let's say, decent money, but they get in one accident. They have one issue with a passenger and it causes some legal issues that they now have to hire a lawyer, for example, or they have to get involved with some insurance company or whatever. And next thing they know, they're now thousands of dollars deep or in debt or whatever. There's a lot of, it kind of stinks to say, but there's a lot of risk that comes along with being a rideshare driver. And I don't think it's addressed enough. I've talked about it in a lot of videos because I think it's very important, because a lot of people don't think when they go on the road, I'm going to get into an accident today, right? You don't really think that, right? Or hopefully you don't. But you do want to cover your bases because, again, if let's say you're driving a lot, even just 20 or 30 hours a week, which a lot of drivers are doing double that, the risk increases significantly. Number 3, expenses. This is definitely the big one a lot of people think about. I mean, as you know as a driver, and this one's really unfortunate, is the more that you drive, and I've said this before in a bunch of other videos, is this odd paradox that the more that you drive, the more money you want to make or put in your pocket, the more money you're going to have to spend. It's that unfortunate situation that you kind of have to spend money to make money, right? Of course, the biggest one is gas, but it's not just that. You know, my brother was driving for Lyft in Denver. He pretty much went through his brakes super fast because he was driving so much. He had to get his entire brakes replaced and everything. You have to get more oil changes. There's just all these little things that the wear and tear on your car adds up super, super fast. And like I said in the beginning of this video, besides these 5 things I'm talking about, the biggest reason why drivers are not making that much money is Uber and Lyft, not paying them a lot, and like I said, taking a bigger percentage out of their earnings. Back in the day when I first started driving, this is important for expenses. If let's say I made $100, Uber and Lyft would take out a flat 20%. Very, very simple. If I make 100, I take away 80, they get $20. I'm like, that makes sense. I don't find the clients or the passengers. They do all the work for me. I thought that was fair. But now I hear drivers saying, and it depends on the area, which is even weirder. Some drivers are saying, yeah, they're taking out 40% or 50%. I think it's Miami, drivers saying that they're taking out 70 or 80%. It's getting ridiculous. So when you look at the fact that Uber and Lyft is just paying their drivers way less, but now drivers are spending even more money for expenses, that spread is getting bigger and bigger, right? As we all know, gas is more expensive now. Maintenance on your car is more expensive. Just stuff, buying things in general is more expensive. And it's so just ridiculous. And the ironic part about it is back in the day, if let's say, you know, Uber and Lyft was paying you a little bit less, I think it would make sense, right? Because back in the day, the expenses were lower. Gas was cheaper. Things were cheaper. And so the revenue could kind of compensate for that. But it's so crazy looking back when I first started driving to now, the expenses are more expensive, or the expenses, the things you have to buy, way more expensive, and the amount you're making is way less. So this gap is getting bigger and bigger, and for the drivers out there, you kind of have to bridge that gap on your own. In addition, let's say if you're not renting a car, like I mentioned in point 1, but you're using your own car, that's more depreciation on that car. When you go to sell it back, you're going to get less money for your car. In addition, dealerships now, one of the first questions they ask you, they usually give you like a sheet of like different facts about the car, just asking you different things, like has it ever been in an accident, blah, blah, blah. One of the things they now ask you is, has your car ever been used for a taxi or ride-sharing like service, such as Uber and Lyft? And if you put yes, that's going to be less money in addition to the miles on your car that you're going to get for your vehicle. The expenses can really, really add up. And like I said, you know, take YouTube, for example. If let's say today I want to go all out and post 5 YouTube videos, I just bang out those videos and upload them. cool, I make more money on YouTube, right? As you can imagine, not always, but typically, definitely a subject for a whole other video. The more YouTube videos you upload, the more money you make. Same thing with a lot of other jobs. But with Lyft and Uber, the answer is kind of, right? Because if you think about it, if I drive 10 hours for Lyft and Uber in a day versus 5, yeah, I'm making more money for those 10 hours, but now I have to spend more money in gas, more money in maintenance, more money on whatever. For YouTube, I don't spend any extra money if it's one video or 5. If it's one video, let's say I went all out on a crazy day and I did 10 YouTube videos in one day, well, I don't spend any extra money to upload those videos. And yes, it does depend industry to industry, but I think especially when it comes to ride sharing, the amount that you make, especially if you drive more, is directly correlational with how much money you have to spend on those expenses. And especially with inflation and everything kind of increasing, it's getting harder and harder to make a decent earning. Number 4, deactivation. This is one that's gotten significantly bigger and become a bigger issue. This kind of goes hand in hand with the legal issues, point number 2 I was making. And that is this, is that it's becoming more common now for, let's say, a driver to pull up their app, they go to start driving, and the app says, sorry, your account's been deactivated. You've been temporarily disabled to drive because of a certain issue we're investigating. I've had so many drivers tell me that, let's say, they get into a dispute with a passenger, or the passenger's drunk, and to retaliate or to get revenge, they say to Uber and Lyft, yeah, my driver, I think he was drunk, or she was drunk, or they were being reckless when driving. Even if that's not true, right? And the issue is Uber and Lyft will typically side with the passenger, not with the driver. So as you can imagine, if, like, say, this happens to you, and this has happened to a lot of drivers I know, you get deactivated for a 1 week. They investigate it. They realize, you know what, sorry, this passenger was making some stuff up. They was making up BS or whatever. We're sorry. Now your account's reactivated. It's like, cool, but that's a week's worth of work you just missed out on. And if you're relying on that for your income, putting food on the table, making ends meet, that is an insane issue to have. And I know a lot of drivers have told me that after getting deactivated just once, there's almost this like mini anxiety in the back of your head being like, all right, if I turn the app this time, am I gonna get that note again? Am I gonna get another negative passenger? And there's this odd thing in the back of your head, constantly worrying of what's gonna happen next. And like I said, this is something that I think a lot of people don't think about, but as you can imagine, the more people that are driving, passengers, it's a roll of the dice who you're gonna get. You never know what a passenger is gonna say as well to Uber and Lyft. A big suggestion I have for all my drivers out there, like I've mentioned, I call it first contact. If you have even a minor dispute with a passenger where you're like, I don't think that ride went the best, contact Uber and Lyft immediately and just say, hey, I just want to let you know this is what happened. That way you're kind of getting on the offensive side of things and the defensive side. That way, like, say if something happens, they can say, hey, Mark, we actually did get a complaint from her or him, but we heard your story first, okay, or they can kind of talk you through it. As opposed to, like, say, they say something to Uber and Lyft, then you're on the back burner being like, wait, why is my account deactivated? You contact Uber and they say, well, your passenger said you were drunk driving or you were drinking a beer when driving. These are stories I hear. And you're like, wait, no, I wasn't drinking. Like, what do you? And now you have to be on this kind of defensive end trying to explain your case, not the position you want to be in. And it's so unfortunate because if you think about it, if you get deactivated for a week, that's an entire week's worth of earnings that you're missing out on. And if you're renting a car on top of that, of course, like I said earlier, that's what, $300 just down the drain. Now you can't make money. Now you're kind of scrambling maybe in the next week to kind of make up for it. It's an unfortunate thing that's happening more and more, which heavily affects your income. And last, but definitely not least, number 5, taxes. This is what I want to mention as kind of like a last point. This is true for any independent contractor, but basically, at the end of the day, when it comes to you being a rideshare driver, it's a huge tricky thing right now if you're an independent contractor or an employee. There's a huge subject. I've talked about it in a bunch of different videos because every state has different laws when it comes to this and different rules. It's a tricky thing overall, but I do want to mention this because I think for a lot of rideshare drivers, especially beginning ones, most people when it comes to taxes have this mindset that, oh, I work. When tax season rolls around, I get money back because every paycheck that I have, the taxes get taken out and then I get it back later on. However, if let's say you're not used to this, let's say you're driving and you're not saving money, you're not keeping track of the expenses that you have, the things that you're paying, your receipts, et cetera, when tax season rolls around, you're going to have to owe money. And for the beginning drivers out there, if you're not used to that, that can be a huge, rude awakening. And I want to stress, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. I do have a couple pro tips. I've done videos about this, but make sure you hire a tax accountant. Keep track of all your receipts. Lyft and Uber, does try to help you out with this in terms of the apps of like keeping track of different things for tax season. So they do try to help you out. But I do suggest as well, don't use tax software, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a big one because let's say you're already not making that much money. Like I talked about this gigantic gap, Uber and Lyft not paying you that much. And let's say when it comes to your expenses you're paying a lot more expenses. You're trying to bridge that gap. And let's say you're only making 20 to 25 an hour. Well, if you're taking all that money and just putting it towards your bills and you're not saving any for tax season, you're not saving anything when you have to owe money, then tax season rolls around and they say, hey, just letting you know, you owe $3,000 right now. And you're like, wait, $3,000? I don't have $3,000. Like, what are you talking about? All the money I made went to bills. Now you have to then go back and try to figure out a way to just whip out $3,000 for the IRS. The taxes and the tax situation, for me, I'm kind of used to it. Like when it comes to YouTube and my music, I pay money. So I'm an independent contractor, so I'm kind of used to it. But if you're not, with all these things combined, you're like, oh man, I'm not making that much money. I'm already renting a car. I'm spending so much in expenses. I'm worried about deactivation. I'm worried about these legal issues or something happened. And then that year goes by, tax season rolls around. They're like, hey, on top of all that, now you owe money. It could be a huge rude awakening.